The congressional hearing room was silent enough to hear the faint hum of the cameras. Every lens pointed toward the witness table, where Kash Patel sat stiffly, his jaw tight, the air around him electric with anticipation. Across the room, Representative Jasmine Crockett rose slowly from her seat. Her navy suit caught the gleam of the overhead lights, every line crisp, every movement deliberate. In her hand was a manila folder marked "Classified" in bold red. For a moment, she said nothing, just stood there, letting the silence stretch. Every reporter, every aide, every spectator could feel the tension twisting through the air. Then she stepped toward the microphone. "Mr. Patel," she began, her voice even, calm, and cutting through the room like glass. "I have here a document that you claimed did not exist." She held the folder high for everyone to see. Across the table, Patel's eyes darted toward it, his face paling slightly. He shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie, then his cufflinks, small gestures of unease that didn't escape the cameras. "This," Crockett continued, "is a memo you personally wrote to the FBI, one that directly contradicts your testimony before this committee." The reaction was immediate. The room erupted in murmurs and gasps. Committee members leaned forward. Reporters scrambled to type every word. The chairman's gavel cracked against the wood, calling for order. "Mr. Patel," Chairman Davis said gravely, "Representative Crockett claims to possess evidence contradicting your sworn testimony. You understand the seriousness of that claim?" Patel forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Chairman, I've testified truthfully in all my appearances before this body," he said smoothly. "I welcome any questions from the gentlewoman from Texas, though I suspect this is another distraction from the real issues we're meant to discuss." But as he spoke, his voice faltered. A bead of sweat traced a slow path down his temple. He kept glancing toward the folder, as though he could will it out of existence. Crockett moved closer. Her tone stayed calm, almost conversational, but each question sliced sharper than the last. "Mr. Patel, you've claimed repeatedly in your public appearances and your book that the FBI was weaponized against conservatives. That's correct, yes?" "Yes, Congresswoman," Patel replied quickly. "The evidence speaks for itself. And you've testified under oath that you never directed or participated in communications that instructed the FBI to investigate individuals based on political motivation. Correct?" "That's right," Patel said. Crockett tapped the folder against her palm. "And you told this committee, 3 months ago, that any suggestion you were involved in such activities was, and I quote, a complete fabrication and a desperate attempt to smear your character. Those were your words?" "Yes, they were," Patel said, his smile tightening. Crockett paused, letting silence reclaim the room. The committee members leaned forward. Everyone sensed the pivot that was coming. "My office recently received documents from a whistleblower," she said, opening the folder. Among them, a memo dated January 14, 2021, on Department of Defense letterhead. "With your signature." Patel's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently. But Crockett didn't stop. "In this memo, Mr. Patel, you request the FBI to, quote, prioritize investigations into individuals who pose potential national security concerns. Would you like to know who's on that list?" A ripple of alarm spread across the room. Gasps echoed from the gallery. Cameras swiveled to capture Patel's reaction. "Congresswoman," Patel said, his tone suddenly defensive, "without seeing the document, I can't comment on something that might be fabricated or taken out of context." "Oh, I understand context," Crockett replied smoothly. "That's why I've also obtained the email chain where you discussed this memo with your colleagues. Would you like me to read those as well?" The room broke into chaos. The chairman's gavel thundered again. A Republican member shot up from his seat. "Mr. Chairman, I object. The gentlewoman is ambushing the witness with documents he hasn't seen." "Mr. Chairman," Crockett countered firmly, "the witness has repeatedly testified that no such documents exist. I am providing him an opportunity to correct the record before entering them into evidence." Chairman Davis hesitated, then nodded. "The witness will answer." Patel leaned forward, his composure slipping. "As I said, I cannot comment on documents I haven't authenticated," he muttered. Crockett nodded slightly. That's fine. I've brought copies for everyone. At her signal, a staffer began handing folders to each committee member. Murmurs rose as they scanned the pages. And for transparency, Crockett continued, I've also invited someone who can verify these documents. The double doors at the back of the room opened. A man in a dark suit walked briskly toward the witness table, his expression grave but calm. Cameras turned instantly. Mr. Chairman, Crockett said, this is former FBI Deputy Director Marcus Coleman. He personally received this memo from Mr. Patel and documented his concerns about its political nature. Patel froze. His attorney's whispering turned frantic. Reporters leaned forward in their seats as Coleman took his place beside the witness. Mr. Coleman, Crockett said evenly, thank you for appearing. Can you confirm you received this memo from Mr. Patel? Yes, Coleman replied, voice steady. I received it on January 14, 2021, directly from Mr. Patel. I raised concerns immediately. And what were those concerns? The memo listed individuals to be investigated without evidence of any criminal behavior, Coleman explained. Every person named was a critic of the administration. I found that politically motivated and deeply inappropriate. Patel shifted uncomfortably. Cameras zoomed in on his face. Mr. Patel, Crockett said, turning back to him. Would you like to respond to Mr. Coleman's statement? Patel stared straight ahead. On advice of counsel, I cannot comment on that. Crockett arched a brow. That's fine. We'll let the evidence speak for itself. She gestured to a staffer who began displaying enlarged images of the memo and Patel's signature on the committee screens. Gasps rippled through the room again as the signature came into view. Chairman Davis struck his gavel for silence. Mr. Patel, do you confirm that this is your signature? Patel leaned toward his microphone. His voice was barely audible. On advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The words sent a jolt through the room. Even seasoned reporters looked stunned. Crockett nodded calmly. Noted for the record. Then she raised her phone. And finally, Mr. Chairman, before we recess, I'd like to submit additional evidence. Text messages between Mr. Patel and several colleagues. In one exchange, Mr. Patel wrote, Need to make examples of the loudest voices. The memo to FBI goes out Thursday. Eyes only. The crowd erupted. Even some of Patel's political allies looked stunned. Chairman Davis banged his gavel again. Order! The committee will recess for 30 minutes. As the room dissolved into chaos, reporters sprinted for the exits to file updates. Patel sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the memo before him. Around him, aides whispered. Lawyers shuffled papers, but Patel didn't move. He had just realized that the document he thought buried forever was now the weapon poised to end his career. When the committee reconvened 30 minutes later, the atmosphere was entirely different. The casual confidence that had filled the room earlier was gone. The air now hung heavy with the gravity of what had just unfolded. Reporters crowded every available inch of space. Photographers jostled for angles. Members of Congress filed back into their seats, faces grim. At the witness table, Kash Patel returned with a larger legal team. His tie had been loosened. His eyes were fixed downward. The man who once thrived under bright lights now looked like he wished they'd all go dark. Chairman Davis struck the gavel. The committee will come to order. Representative Crockett, you may resume your questioning. Crockett stepped up once again, her composure unbroken. Behind her, the large display screen flickered to life, showing a scanned copy of the memo. Patel's name and signature unmistakable. Mr. Patel, she began, her tone steady, professional. You've now had time to review the document. Can you confirm for the committee whether this is your signature? Patel leaned toward the microphone. His voice trembled slightly. On the advice of counsel, he said, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Gasps rippled across the gallery. The chairman's gavel fell again, restoring silence. Crockett nodded slowly. Very well. Your right is noted. However, the authenticity of the document does not depend on your confirmation. We have a witness who has already verified its origin. She turned toward Marcus Coleman, who sat calmly at the adjacent table. Mr. Coleman, for the record, can you confirm that you received this memo from Mr. Patel? Yes, Coleman said clearly. It was delivered directly to my office. I immediately documented my concerns in an internal memo to the FBI director. And those concerns were what precisely? Coleman took a measured breath. The memo listed several American citizens to be investigated under the pretext of national security. But there was no supporting evidence, no probable cause. Every individual on that list had one thing in common. They were critics of the administration. That raised serious constitutional and ethical issues. Crockett nodded. And what action did you take after receiving this memo? I escalated it through proper channels, Coleman replied. Ultimately, the FBI chose not to act on it. But the mere fact that it was written, on Department of Defense letterhead no less, was alarming. Crockett turned back toward Patel. Mr. Patel, would you like to clarify your intent in sending that memo? Patel didn't look up. On advice of counsel, he repeated quietly, I assert my Fifth Amendment right. A long silence followed, the kind that made even the air feel heavier. Then Crockett gestured toward the staffer at her side. The screen changed again, this time displaying a string of text messages. The room collectively leaned forward. These, Crockett explained, are messages obtained from Mr. Patel's personal device through lawful means. Dated January 12, 2021. Mr. Patel, you wrote, and I quote, need to make examples of the loudest voices. The memo to FBI goes out Thursday. Keep this close. Eyes only. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Even the most seasoned committee members looked unsettled. Cameras zoomed in on Patel, whose hands were now visibly trembling on the table. Mr. Coleman, Crockett continued, did the FBI act upon Mr. Patel's memo? No, Congresswoman, Coleman replied firmly. We recognized immediately that it lacked legal basis. I documented my objections and ensured the directive was not implemented. So, Crockett said, the system's internal checks prevented the misuse of federal power. That's correct, Coleman said. But it doesn't change the intent behind the request. That intent was political. Crockett turned toward the audience briefly, then back to Patel. Mr. Patel, you published a book last year, Government Gone Wild, How the Left Weaponized Federal Agencies. On page 143, you wrote, I never saw a single instance of our administration using agencies for political purposes, and I would have resigned immediately if I had. Would you like to amend that statement today? Patel's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Finally, he whispered, on advice of counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right. The room exhaled in disbelief. Crockett's expression remained composed. No further response from the witness, she said. Mr. Chairman, I move to enter the memo, the text messages, and the corroborating email correspondence into the official record. Without objection. So ordered, Chairman Davis said solemnly. Crockett's voice grew quieter but sharper. Mr. Patel, you've raised millions of dollars from the public based on your claims that the FBI was weaponized against you and your allies. You accused others of doing precisely what you yourself attempted. Do you have anything to say to those who believed you? The silence was absolute. Cameras clicked softly. Patel's attorney leaned in, murmuring something only he could hear. Then Patel spoke, barely audible. On advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right. The exchange was over. Crockett gave a slight nod and stepped back. The chairman thanked her and announced that questioning would proceed to the next member, but no one seemed ready to speak. The gravity of what had just unfolded hung over the room like a storm cloud. When the hearing finally adjourned hours later, the story had already spread across every major news network. Headlines blazed. Memo contradicts Patel testimony. Congressional. Hearing turns explosive. Crockett confronts Patel with classified evidence. Video. Clips flooded social media, Crockett's calm precision against Patel's unraveling composure. Millions of viewers watched, replayed, and shared the moment he invoked the Fifth Amendment for the first time. Outside the Capitol, reporters swarmed the steps, their voices competing in a storm of questions. Patel's legal team escorted him through a side exit, his head down, his usual confident smile gone. That night, cable news ran wall-to-wall coverage. Analysts dissected every moment of the hearing, frame by frame. "This isn't just about one official," a former prosecutor said on CNN. "It's about the weaponization of narrative." Mr. Patel built his public image on claims of victimhood. But today, we saw evidence that he was the one trying to weaponize power. By dawn, fallout had begun. Patel's publisher released a statement saying his book was under review for factual accuracy. Networks that once featured him as a regular guest quietly removed his name from upcoming schedules. Donors to his legal defense fund flooded social media demanding refunds. The Department of Justice issued a brief statement acknowledging they were reviewing the testimony and evidence presented. Behind closed doors, sources confirmed prosecutors were exploring whether Patel had committed perjury in his prior congressional appearances. Marcus Coleman, the former FBI official who testified, was suddenly a national figure. Praised for his professionalism, he told one interviewer simply, "The truth is not partisan. It's either true or it isn't." Within days, civil suits began to surface from individuals named in Patel's memo. Attorneys argued that his directive represented an attempt to violate their civil rights. Legal experts predicted the potential damages could reach millions. Even allies began to distance themselves. "If the documents are real," said one senator who had once written the foreword to Patel's book, "then this represents a serious breach of public trust." Meanwhile, Crockett's reputation soared. Political shows booked her for in-depth interviews. Yet she refused to gloat. "This isn't about me," she told one anchor. "It's about accountability." Mr. Patel spent years accusing others of misconduct while secretly engaging in it himself. The American people deserve better. Public opinion polls showed a rare moment of bipartisan agreement. A majority found the evidence credible, and Patel's credibility destroyed. Editorial boards praised the hearing as a rare victory for fact over fiction. Over the following week, investigators uncovered even more internal drafts of Patel's memo showing a longer list of targets and communications with media, personalities to coordinate narratives about deep state attacks. Each revelation deepened the irony. The man who shouted the loudest about political persecution had been the one attempting it. In an interview, Crockett reflected on that paradox. "Projection is a powerful political tool," she said. "Accuse others of what you're guilty of. Repeat it until people stop questioning. But the truth has a way of resurfacing, especially when you leave it in writing." By the end of the month, Patel had all but disappeared from public view. Once a fixture on television, he issued no statements, made no appearances, and ignored reporters' questions. The Justice Department quietly continued its review. Legal analysts suggested that Patel faced possible charges for false statements to Congress and obstruction. For many Americans, the episode became a moment of clarity in a sea of political noise, a reminder that documentation still mattered, that facts still had weight. The final irony was almost poetic. The same system Patel claimed was corrupt had exposed his own corruption. The same institutions he had accused of political targeting had safeguarded the nation from it. And the woman he underestimated, a freshman congresswoman from Texas, had dismantled years of his deception in a single afternoon. As one columnist wrote, "Jasmine Crockett didn't shout. She didn't grandstand. She simply presented evidence. And in doing so, she reminded the country that truth still has a voice." In the end, the story wasn't just about Kash Patel's downfall. It was about what happens when evidence meets arrogance, when paper trails outlast talking points, and when accountability finally catches up to power. And though the headlines would fade and the hearings would move on to other matters, one image would linger in the nation's memory. Jasmine Crockett standing tall before the microphone, holding a manila folder that changed everything. The silence that followed her words that day said it all. In Washington, truth may bend, but it never breaks.